Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 2026 edition of Locations Behind the Oscars, courtesy of the Location Managers Guild International. I am Sasha Alvarez Denisoff, a mostly Los Angeles-based locations professional. A couple quick rules of the road. Please stay on mute. If you have questions, put them in the chat and we will get to them if we can. We have a really great lineup today, and we'll be speaking with the location teams who worked on this year's Oscar-nominated features, including Frankenstein, Begonia, F1, Hamnet, The Secret Agent, Marty Supreme, Sinners, Train Dreams, and One Battle After Another. We've been doing these panels for several years now, and for as long as we've been doing them, it still never ceases to amaze us what it takes behind the scenes for the location professionals who scouted and managed these productions to pull it all off. So, huge congratulations to all of our panelists. We are so happy to have you here and listen to your stories. I also want to thank my co-moderators this afternoon. We have JJ Levine from Los Angeles, Dee Gregson and Mick Ratman from the UK, and Robin McDonald from Canada. And I just wanted to take a quick minute to tell you, especially those of you who are not members yet, what the LMGI is all about. The LMGI is a nonprofit 501c6 whose sole reason for existence is to promote what location professionals like you and I do for a living and to celebrate excellence on location. Think of us as a public relations arm for your profession, educating and elevating awareness to the public, government, agencies, producers, directors, and even the rest of the crew on what it is that we all do, and particularly our contributions to the creative process. We do that through programs like these Zoom calls, through events, advertising, educational panels, and proactive public relations efforts such as outreach to magazines and newspapers and other promotional opportunities. Additionally, the LMGI publishes the gorgeous Compass magazine filled with photographs from your fellow locations professionals. We are almost 100% volunteer managed, with the main exception being our communications and operations director, Erica Howard, who is with us on this call. And thus, we don't want to kid ourselves. We really do need your membership subscriptions to keep it all going. There are various levels to that membership that coincide with your level of experience and where you are in your career, from apprentice to emeritus. So if you don't know about us and you aren't a member yet, please check us out at locationmanagers.org. Finally, the LMGI award submissions are open now, and they will be open until April 28th. And this is for features, television commercials that were released between June 2nd, 2025, and I believe it was June 1st, 2026. And if these were shot at least 60% on location, they are eligible for the award. If you're not sure of the percentage that was shot on location, please submit anyway so that we can consider it and vet it, because we love your submissions. And now, without any further ado, let's get into it. And I'm going to hand it over to JJ Levine, who's going to be chatting with Andy Buckley, the supervising location manager of Frankenstein.
Good morning, everybody, and good morning, Andy Buckley. I'd like to introduce Andy briefly. Andy's credits include films such as Gladiator 2, Argyle, Tetris, The King's Man, Rocket Man, Mission Impossible Fallout, and a whole host of others. Most recently, well, actually, not most recently, because Andy's on location in Malta right now. But we won't talk about that. We'll talk about Frankenstein, which is, if you all haven't seen it, an incredible retelling of the classic masterpiece, brilliantly done by the location department. Only the location department, which did everything. So let's welcome Andy Buckley. And Andy, my first question for you really is, what was it like to work with Guillermo del Toro, and how is that different from working with a lot of the other directors you've worked with?
Good morning, good afternoon, JJ, good afternoon, everyone else around the world. Um, I mean, working with Del Toro, Guillermo, was probably one of the most best experiences of my career. Engaging with such a creative genius who understands every department was just incredible. It was just an absolute complete honor to do the stuff that we did with him. He was amazing, amazing.
And
One of the
you,
things that, yeah, sorry, I was going to say one of the things that stood out mostly is the his work ethic is just incredible. I mean, we've all been with directors that turn up on set and say, "What are we doing here?" That's not the case with Del Toro. He knows everything from what the armor is doing, from what costume, from what everybody in his on his film is doing. He knows everything. He's unbelievable.
You mentioned too, Andy, when we were talking that
Yeah.
he travels with his sketch artist, or he scouts with his sketch artist, which
Yeah. Yeah,
that
yeah.
was
Yeah.
really
Yeah,
incredible.
yeah, whenever we were doing scouts, and this was the UK, I looked after the UK. Whenever he was over in the UK, his concept artist was there with him, sat at the back of the minibus, sketching away. So we'd go to a location and he would be sketching. And we'd look at his sketches and, from all of these little sketches, Guillermo would go away and he would do his sketches. It's just incredible.
Did you, it seems like the real life location, and also I just
Yeah.
want to let everybody know that Andy mentioned that they started scouting on this film in 2023.
Yeah.
So that was quite a bit back to begin with. And then, I was going to ask you about, like, it feels a lot like the real life locations were expanded upon, and detailed sets were built out either on stage or on
Mm.
location. And can you tell us a little bit about what was built based on what was real and how you worked collaboratively with the production designer, Tamara Deverell?
Yeah, Tamara Deverell.
Tamara, okay.
Tamara is a genius, and she's the perfect designer for a location manager because she would rather than sometimes we get designers that go, yeah, you know what I'm thinking about, don't you? And you go, yeah, you haven't got a clue. She visualizes it and helps you. And some of the locations, the anatomy room where the body was cut up, that was a lot of research that they were looking at in the UK. The problem we had was what we were looking for was quite small. So she was taking a lot of the history of what we got in the UK and taking it back to Canada and building it. The boats, all of the boats, the boat that was built on the back lot in Toronto. We scouted many, many ships here in the UK, and then from that, she took that away and built the ship there. I mean, if I can share some of the concepts, some of the stuff, what I'll do, I'll
Yeah,
share
that's
my smug mug. If I can go to this, can everyone see this?
Mhm.
Everyone got that?
great.
So these are the kind of reference pictures that she would give and show to us. So, we were looking for um Swiss cottages. She wanted us to find Swiss cottages, which never made the film. Some of these were cut, but this is the kind of thing they were asking for. The castle was quite specific. Now, when we were scouting, she was looking at castles in Europe, and this all happened before she came, or before they all came to the UK. But we then opened the search to look at castles in England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. And I think they settled on the castle that was just outside of Stirling, the William Wallace Castle, which is the one you see in the actual movie itself. This is some of the concepts or the references that she had for that specific room, which again was quite a big part of the movie. So she sent that away, and we kind of built that. Um, how do I go back?
And you built
Uh,
that, Andy, on stage in Toronto, right?
that
Is
was
that
all built. That was built. That was all built in Toronto. Yes, and then obviously all of our scouting. We scouted all over the UK for different types of villas for Frankenstein's house. If I could share some of the scouting pictures, and I've got to say, a lot of this work in Scotland was done by Morven McPherson, who's an absolute genius in Scotland. And she found this one location, and it's always nice to find a virgin location. So there's this place called Dunnet House, which is this place here, which in the film where you see the actual library, this library here, which you see at the top there, was this place here. And in this place, this is where the kids used to play football. And it was draped, and then they just kick a ball around, play tennis. And it was just basically a playground area. And when Guillermo saw this, and certainly tomorrow, the vision that they had was just, we're gonna polish the floor, build all the bookcases, and turn this into an amazing set, which is what they did. And what we actually did, there's a funny story here, if I may. So we wanted to leave it. We wanted to leave this set. We wanted to walk away because it was going to save us thousands. And this guy is a Scottish guy. He's got a casino downstairs in the cellar, which everyone in a castle should have. And we went and played cards. And I said to him, if I win, we walk away. He goes, right, okay. So we had a couple of whiskies, probably more than a couple of whiskies. Started playing cards, and then we did a turn of a card. I had a queen, he had a seven. We walked away, so we didn't reinstate. So, which was quite good. I told this to the producer, and he's like, "What would you have done if we'd lost?" I went, "Well, we'd probably have spent a lot of money." So that was a great location.
Andy, we're gonna we have so many people on the call that we don't have as much time as we would love, but can you, I think what we do have time for is to talk
Yeah.
about the Royal Mile, because that was like
Oh
a
yeah.
pretty incredible feat. And
Yeah.
if you have any
The
photos
raw.
to share on that as well, that'd be great. But just to talk about filming there during the height of tourist season.
Yeah, the Royal Mile. So we shot the Royal Mile in September, and what happened was um, the uh, the actual the Fringe, which is the comedy season, that happens in August. So you can't engage with anyone in Edinburgh during that period. So we had to do a lot of the prep beforehand and then come in straight after the Fringe. But our biggest challenge there was we had like 200 extras all in costume, all across the Royal Mile, and they don't close the Royal Mile. They don't. Last time they closed it was for the Queen's funeral. So just trying to share these now. 2 seconds. So we decided that the best thing to do there for costume was to hang on. Take a multi-story car park, take the first or the last sort of four floors, and then what I did for costume, I stuck a carpet down on every level, blanked out the windows, and I stuck costume and hair and makeup in a multi-story car park. And it's probably the best thing I've ever done. And it's kind of like all the challenges we had there was just brilliant. But these are a few images of what we've done on the actual mile itself. Covered it in mush, and we only had like 48 hours on the mile. There's
And
Guillermo
you
with the
pulled
team.
up a scene as well, right? From the
So yeah, so one of the days up by the cathedral, we obviously arranged to close everything. Guillermo works really fast, and we got ahead of time. And he turns around and goes, "Right, Eddie, we want to shoot the forget the accent, forget the accent." He goes, "We want to shoot that scene tomorrow. Can we do that?" So I went away with the team. I said, "Yeah, come on, let's make it happen." The problem is we had a closure in place for our specific day. So I said to him, and this is why Guillermo is so great. He understands. I said, "Look, we can do it, but we're not going to have a closure on the road." I said, "We can divert away, but we're going to have live traffic." And we shot that with everyone walking past on the cathedral, and that's cracking on. And yeah, because there was no dialogue, so it made sense to do that.
It's
And
amazing.
that's what we did there.
That's crazy. It's amazing that you were able to pull that off.
Yeah,
Um, I guess I think, are we out of time, Sash, or what's our
probably. I
Just
probably
about,
waffled on too much.
we're just at about time. Yeah.
they're just
We're at
at about
11.
time. All right, just real quickly, Andy, can you talk about the beach? Was that part of your
Yeah, the beach where Frankenstein, where the monster.
Yeah.
The two scenes, yeah. So we did that in Seacliff, which is in Scotland, another beach in Scotland. It's a private beach. The challenges there was getting the equipment down, and it was the first time that we were going to see the monster in Scotland. So the challenge we had there was obviously his costume change, and then get him onto the beach, and we had to dress it for a snow dress, and then obviously for him arriving. Logistically, we had challenges there because it was a tidal beach. So we had to make sure the tide was in at the right time or the tide was going out at the right time. And getting the equipment down was quite difficult. But yeah, it was a good location, great location.
Awesome. Well, y'all, Andy, thanks so much. And if you haven't seen
Thank
Frankenstein,
you.
it is a visual feast if you have not seen it. So I recommend it highly to everyone. And Andy, I hope you hang out with us for a little bit.
I will be hanging out indeed. Thank you very much,
Great.
JJ. Thank you, everyone. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right. So next up, we've got Begonia joining us. We have Tom Woods, supervising location manager from the UK, and also Joseph Rains, who is one of the key assistant location managers based out of Atlanta. Thank you both for being here. This was a really fascinating project. Um, Tom, I'm curious to know, it's my understanding that about 99% of this was filmed on location, which is particularly unusual for a film of this stature. So, can you tell us a little bit about when you got involved, the sort of like creative process for scouting, what was decided on, being shot in the UK versus Atlanta? I just sort of love to hear how this all came together.
So I came on board. They'd done a bit of scouting before. There was another location manager called Tony Hood who was part of that process, and then I was brought on board before we started to build the main house where everything happens. They had a lot of issues with planning and neighbours and everybody with that, so I was brought on board um, to sort of get all that through. And then we continued the scouting with Yorgos. It was 99% sure. The only thing out of the movie that I'm aware of that wasn't on location is obviously, if you haven't seen it, I'm going to ruin it for you, but the spaceship at the end with all the goo, that's the only thing that was built between the UK and Atlanta. And all the other locations were, we found a lot in the UK that due to scheduling reasons, we couldn't shoot here because we were overrunning in the house. So some of the bits where Jesse is cycling or the little interconnecting moments between some of them were, and the bit where she gets out of the ambulance and runs back, were all scouted in the UK, were all approved by Yorgos and James Price, the designer, but due to scheduling reasons had to go across to Atlanta. And watching the movie, it was interesting to see what we'd originally thought it was going to be and to see that it was relatively similar to what they'd found across in Atlanta.
I'm curious to check in with Joseph since you were on the Atlanta side of that. How did that sort of collaboration work as far as, like looking at reference photos for what had already been established as a potential location in the UK versus what you were trying to match in Atlanta?
Uh, just get as close as possible. Obviously, the plants are a little different. Obviously, like the roadways are different. Some of the things we presented for the roadways weren't quite cutting it. And so I think it was Robbie was just on a drive going to the airport and chose one of the hardest spots to film at. And that is naturally what we ended up having to go with. Um, and yeah, shut down the road. That was the police chase. That's when the police crashed into the barrier. And yeah. Um,
You'd mentioned in some previous conversations we'd had that that was like a particularly difficult location. So can you tell us a little bit about what went into that?
Yes, that was about 2 or 3 months talking to GDOT, which is our transportation roadway, I guess, oversight committee here. And it is this connection between Buckhead and then downtown Atlanta. And so it's just super busy. I had to get there I opened up at 3:30 that morning and we lost it, I think, at 3:30 p.m. So that was a lot of cops. I think that bill was just over a quarter million. It was fun.
And Tom, you mentioned you had some interesting, like, sort of planning issues as well, as far as neighbors with like the Hero House. So, what was happening over
So,
there?
so due to obviously, if we just you could have built some of the house, you could have built the basement in the studio, you could have built the interior of the house in the studio. But both Yorgos, James, well, all three of them, and Robbie, um, they wanted it to be this immersive space, this immersive experience for Emma and Jesse and everyone else who was in it. So it had to be built as one. So in order to do that in the UK, we had to get specific planning permission to allow us to dig down, build the basement, and build a whole house in what was an ecologically sensitive area, which I think quite a lot of the people on here will have previously done as well. So that was the first challenge, was to get past all those bits of red tape before we could even actually break ground and start building. And then the complex.
About how much time did that take to get those permissions?
It was probably about 5 weeks from when I came on board. Anyway, yeah,
And you'd mentioned that you used real bees in
they
this
did.
movie.
So everyone had to leave site before the bees were brought on. No one was harmed, or any bees were harmed in this movie. But everyone had to leave, and at sunset, when the bees are asleep, the apurist or whoever was in charge of them had to come on site. Myself and a team member were stood further down the hill, waiting for her to come back. But she then went up and put all I can't remember how many there was, but there were thousands and thousands of them put into the hives. They were then left asleep and sort of opened out in the morning to allow them to go off. We had to put 100-foot sort of circumference around where those live bees were. If you were inside that 100-foot circumference, you had to have a bee suit on. So if you watch the extras on the movie, there is some footage of not all the crew, but probably about 30-40 of the crew all wearing bee suits, all filming around the beehives themselves. It weirdly, if you were 100-foot away, they're not going to get you, they're not going to bite you, or which not a lot of us were convinced of at the beginning.
Fascinating. Joseph, you'd mentioned that you had, we all have this issue where sometimes we'll think we have something locked down and then at the last minute something crazy happens. So what happened with the wig shop the day before you were supposed to film there? And how did you manage all of that?
Um, with a lot of stress. Two robbers came in through the ceiling and stole $150,000 in the strip mall that we were filming the wig shop in. And the bank was trying to sell that property and feared that filming would only make it more of an attractive place to steal from by filming there. And they kicked us out. So I had 5 hours. I probably aged 5 years in those 5 hours to find something to begin prep early the next morning. And it happened to be just across the street, which was fantastic, but I didn't know that at the time. So that was fun.
Well, that sounds like it resolved itself in a quick and easy manner, despite the crazy stress getting there. Um, Tom, one question that we like to ask people sometimes is just, was there anything unusually challenging beyond what we've already sort of talked about that, the audience might not see this when they're watching the film, but behind the scenes, like what was going on, and it kind of
Um,
maybe gives you a chuckle.
yeah, I mean, it's basically, obviously, Yorgos just wants 360 wherever he goes. I don't know if Joseph found the same thing, but we would talk. He'd just say, I just want 360. I'm not, put the trucks away. He doesn't want loads of crew around him. It's a very small group of people. Himself, the first AD, and Robbie Ryan, who sort of are dealing with Emma and Jesse and doing all those things. So that was a challenge wherever you went. And again, I don't know about Joseph, but with all the little elements at the end where everyone is dead, there was a lot of effort that had to go in to what was, a 1 second thing on screen. But for instance, there was one which was a mosque, which we took over or tried to take over, a mosque in Regent's Park, to obviously pretend these were all happening around different locations of the world. they wouldn't sign the contract until the afternoon before, and we had 100 extras coming in to play dead whilst some of their usual activities were taking place. That was due to the fact there were troubles here in the UK, which obviously they were aware of through police, but we weren't. But eventually that did happen. But that was a bit of a scary moment. Yeah.
And Joseph, to sort of close it out, as Tom was mentioning towards the end of the film, without really spoiling it for too many people, but there are a lot of really interesting. I mean,
I said spaceship and dead people. What can I do?
it's worth a watch. This movie is not what you think it is when you start watching it. So at the end, we've got all these tiny little pops of what are actually very complicated locations that, I know watching this, like, what did it take to do that? What were a couple of your most proud moments from that segment?
The Fernbank was challenging in and of itself. That's the one where there's like a dinosaur skeleton. Uh, Very strict schedule. All the students are going there, K through 12, going to, see the museum. And so that was super challenging. We had to get in there, I think, that morning and leave again by 3 or 4. So we had multiple locations like that throughout the Atlanta filming, where we just had to get in and out. We shut down Freedom Parkway, which is where there's a whole bunch of cars wrecked on a freeway. That was super challenging. That was the same day that we did that 3 a.m. to 3 p.m. thing for me. So that was just
Ooh.
incredible all around. As Tom was mentioning, we had schedule issues too because, they were tight over there, so we had to be tight over here. And yeah, the 360 stuff. I love an artist, but that also, adds a lot on our plate.
Yeah, I'd love to meet you at some point, Joseph. We can talk
Someday.
through it. We can go through our experiences in private.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Tom and Joseph, thank you both so much for being on this call. And I hope you two do get to meet in person, swap notes about your tales in the trenches from either side of the ocean. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to Mick Ratman, who's going to be chatting with our panelists from F1.
So just a quick breakdown of your small career of F1, Snow White, No Time to Die, Jack Ryan, Fast and Furious, Mission Impossible, and it goes on and on Atomic Blonde and God knows what else. So you've done a hell of a lot of work, which is fantastic. And working on F1, which for me was the first time I've actually really found out what goes on behind F1 meetings and the whole world of F1. So could you tell us a little about the role of the location department on a film like F1 and what made the project unusual from your perspective?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. No one more surprised than me for the film to receive an Oscar a Best Picture nomination, but there we go. So from very early in the project, it became kind of abundantly clear that Joe Kosinski, our director, is not a man who, wants to retreat into a volume stage or build a set and wrap it in a green screen. There are, of course, endless tricks and cheats, utilized in the making of this film. But if he could have shot it all for real, he would have. And that was our sort of guiding light from day one. And we ended up doing an awful lot more than I thought we would when we started the project. As part of that drive, very little was built on a stage. There were a handful of stage sets, but everything else was with us in the real world. We had a big team across the world and across the 2 years that this project ran for. And it became what sort of stood out to me in my career is the integration or the sort of setting of this film within a motorsport environment, and even more sort of pressingly than that, within a kind of live broadcast scenario, which was definitely not something I ever even thought about before. We became. We always do this, of course, but the challenge of integrating our kind of cumbersome, overweight Hollywood movie crew into this kind of really tightly, very precise military operation, championship and sporting environment was kind of where we earned our bread and butter.
Great. And to actually navigate within that world and with permissions to those people, what was the process of trying to get everything together, including the factory and
So
the
obviously early when I started on the film, which was a long time before we started filming, there was a sort of deal done in principle between Jerry Bruckheimer Films and Apple and F1 itself, a company called Formula One Management, which is the sort of overarching umbrella. But within that, there are dozens of separate organizations and teams and agencies and contractors that all exist within that kind of Formula One ecosystem. And obviously we, immediately knew we needed them all on board for various reasons, because we wanted to feature them, because we were inevitably going to take up space and time during race weekends, and also as you said, because we're going to, we wanted to sort of scout and film in their factories and their other facilities. But what threw me a little bit initially is that F1, you imagine, is you sort of, I maybe naively thought it was this kind of harmonious place full of open-minded people, but whereas actually the competitive nature of what they do, of their daily business, makes the paddock quite a suspicious, quite a political place. The cross-pollination risk for them is massive. If they get a competitive advantage of a tenth of a second because someone on a film crew has gone from one factory to another. So there was a really a tightrope to walk there, and also all of these myriad different agencies and teams and organizations within F1 all have a very different attitude to publicity. Anyone that's seen Drive to Survive will know that there are some have these kind of big bombastic characters that love it in the limelight, whereas others are much more private. When we didn't feel that. The place where we felt that the most, and what I'm trying to say, is within their own factories, which are the most sort of the holiest of holies. It's the inner sanctum of the team. They do everything. All of their engineering at the racetrack takes place within their factory. They've never allowed anyone from outside to go in and scout it. So for me to want to go to all 10 teams' factories and take identical sets of photographs, was a complete anathema to them, and it took my team and I a long time to convince them. There was a real sort of process of building up trust, and while that was happening, production were getting itchy, designer were getting itchy, because we had to kind of just rely on YouTube videos and stock footage and that kind of thing, which obviously is not how we like to work. So there was a real process of learning about each other.
And to actually shoot on race days must have been a real headache for you. How did you work that out?
I mean, I think of it as an opportunity, but no, it was difficult. So every what I hadn't realized, again, because like you, I didn't know that much about F1 before starting the project, is just the extent to which every square foot of a circuit is commercialized over a race weekend, which I guess is obvious if when you think about it, but they become mini festivals. They're enormous tourist money makers, and the commercial arrangement that each circuit has with F1 means that it's in the circuit's interest to put on a concert and have a fan zone and all of these things. The racing is kind of almost, in some places, it's a kind of secondary event. So when you get to the heart of it, to the paddock and to the pit lane, that's obviously that's the sporting environment. So every square foot there is taken up by a team, with a purpose and with trying to win a championship or score points. So for us to come in and say, well, we want, we need a unit base and we need somewhere to park the trucks and we need welfare, and teams run their cars from their garage, but our garage was a set. So we needed a garage on the pit lane, but we also needed a car base, somewhere else. So we were inevitably asking for kind of more than teams got, which again became easier once we understood each other. But we were a brand new thing for F1. They do a lot of filming, but it's of a completely different nature. And we too, needed to find our way with them. They have a very high, because everything is broadcast or can be broadcast over a race weekend. They have a very high visual presentation standard that they required us to adhere to. So all of the crew had to wear uniforms as though they were a race team. We got told off the night before the Silverstone Grand Prix in 2023 because the trackway that we had laid beneath our unit base in the field was dirty, and when it was seen from the helicopter angle, it would not look right. So we were out overnight jet washing the trackway to make sure that it looked good. The little box we built at the back of the garage where we kept our kit and equipment, because the working trucks were obviously a mile away, had to be branded, had to have had a specific design with sponsors' logos and all of these things, so that it would fit in within that ecosystem. And all of this stuff became second nature, but there was a learning curve for us initially, the sort of first wave, and then obviously retraining the crew to work in that environment and abide by the rules. And they were brilliant. The crew were amazing, and they got it. But it was a process.
And looking back on the project, are there any moments or experiences that really capture what it was like working on the film? Things that you found out that you never knew about before?
And there's endless things I found out that I didn't know about before. But I think the thing that I look back on, and there are two aspects to working within that world that I look back on and think about. The first and the sort of the less serious is that the amazing enthusiasm and engagement that we had from real Formula One fans. So we would go into grandstands with people that had paid to buy a ticket. We would give them Apex, which was the name of our fictional team. We would give them Apex hats and flags and big cutout pictures of Brad Pitt's head. And they would chant and scream, and ADs would sort of do a sort of cheerleading thing. And they just really went along with it. The fans in Japan were turning up with Apex cars made on their baseball caps, which we hadn't given them. They turned up with those. And it was an incredible privilege to sort of be around that sort of passion. But I think the key thing for me was the risk of working alongside the championship. So to use a kind of apt analogy, well, our approach was always to try and get our two cars as close as possible, but they must never touch. The golden rule was that nothing the film did could ever affect racing or affect the ability of the race to run normally and for teams to compete. And there were some of our more outlandish things which we came close. I think we came within 7 seconds of the cars, the particular moment at the beginning of Silverstone when the real F1 grid roars away and our cars follow them. The plan was that they then dip off at the first turn so that when the cars come back around, the race cars come back around, we're out their way. But inevitably, the one time that one of the cars failed. And so there was this frantic scramble to push the car off the racetrack before Verstappen and his mates came back round. And the FIA, who's the sort of policeman of the sport, they told us we were within 7 seconds of affecting the race, which would have been a bad day at the office. But it was just how much trust they how much they extended to us to let us do things like that and a million more, and then how incredibly adaptable the film crew were at once they understood the brief and they got the rules, being ready, being prepared, being drilled, proof of concept demonstrations. It was a really, it was a very impressive thing to watch and to be part of.
That sounds fantastic. I mean, I find that every job we do, we learn something different. and something we never thought we'd ever want to learn or learn. But great. I'm going to end it now because I think we're out of time.
We
But
are
thank
just
you.
at time. Thank you so much, Charlie, for being with us. And now we're going to hand it over to our moderator, Dee Gregson, who's going to be speaking with Lindsay Powell, who is the supervising location manager on Hamnet.
Hi, hello, Lindsay. I don't think you could get much more of a contrast between films than F1 and Hamnet, quite possibly. Um, Congratulations on your great work on Hamnet. And I just wondered if you could talk to me a little bit about when you sort of first encountered the main little town of Webley, where you were filming for Stratford-on-Avon and had to really kind of create a bond with all the residents there and all of the crazy things you had to do there.
Of course. Hi, Dee. Hi, everyone. And I was thinking exactly the same listening to Charlie. Quite different experiences. I'm thinking this one's going to be a little different. You're right. The first time we went to Webley, I went and scouted it about 3 days before Chloe landed into the UK, and we knew she was doing her initial scout. And we had done some Zoom calls together with Fiona, the production designer, and Lukash Zell, and we had shortlisted some locations. And I had gone down and I had stood in Webley, and I thought, yeah, it's pretty special here. It's pretty unique. And we knew we were looking for a corner that we could take over. We weren't trying to necessarily match Stratford in a way that Stratford feels and the way that the streets run there, but we knew it was really important to our story that we kept coming back to this corner. And Chloe flew in, she landed in Heathrow, we got in the buses and we went straight on a scout. And Webley was our second place that we visited, but the first place that we visited for this particular location. And that was it. She knew from that moment. I think I was saying to you, Dee, earlier in the week, we went and it's a brilliant village. I have made lifelong friends there who I feel very lucky to have worked there. I was saying to you, we closed it for a month. It took a lot of work to get those residents on side. It is a small village in Herefordshire in the Midlands in the UK. And they're very used to their routines. It's tractors, buses, cars. The post van comes in and they go to the postal van to get their mail. It wasn't something that when we first put it towards them, they were very supportive, but of course it was, how is this going to affect our daily life? But yes, we were very lucky that from working together, an amazing location team that was based down there full time, we did get the permission to close off those streets for a month.
And who was the first person that you spoke to in Webley? Had you sort of spoken to the parish council or anyone before you brought Chloe along there?
I had contacted the county council, but unfortunately for us at the time and the turnaround with that particular borough, there was not a phone number. There was not a direct contact. They didn't have a film office. They required a full risk assessment before they would assess any filming application. So I, of course, I went to Creative England. We put the feelers out there, but we knew we had to go. And actually, the first person I met is a lady called Fiona, and she owned a tea shop on the corner, on our hero corner. Right. And Fiona and I became very good friends. And she not only became the hero sort of shop and location in that setup, but yeah, Fiona became our backup. We then had a lovely gentleman called Ken. And honestly, between those two, they were like our encyclopedia for the village, and they really championed us. They were amazing. I think we were talking earlier this week. We had residents meetings. You never know Are you going to get 3 people there? Are you going to get 300? We did get 300, which was a little shock for the first setup, but they were brilliant. They came, they were like our inside feeders to let us know what was going on, who we needed to watch out for.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, incredible.
Yeah. And what about when you, because I know, and I was sort of surprised to find this out from you, that the flooding that happens was done for real. So tell me a little bit about how you created the flood and how you protected their houses and so on.
Yep, you are right. We did do that flood for real in that village. There was lots of conversations that went around, and obviously working with our visual effects teams and our special effects teams, but we wanted to be able to achieve it. And the topography in the village lends itself very nicely to a flood, and everyone was very confident that we could achieve that on location. And I remember holding another residents meeting and taking our special effects supervisor, John Vanderpool, who I'd worked with many times, to this meeting. And his opening line was something about Bond. And I honestly wanted to hide because I thought, oh my gosh, all these villagers are going to think that we're going to blow up Webley. No, no, no. But they gave us their full support. And we did. We had 2 40-yard row skits filled with thousands of litres of water that they let go with their pumps, and they did a wonderful job. They protected the street. They built up the road to the pavement level with sandbags and liners. And then we dressed over the top of it. And we had gully suckers at the end of the street continuously pumping it out. And I remember sitting there, our executive producer, Laurie Borg, we had a lot of residents. Obviously, there was a lot of excitement in the village that we were going to flood their street.
Cool.
He invited them all in. And all of the residents outside of our lock-off for this shot got to come and stand inside and watch this in real time. And there was one particular resident, Maggie, and I remember she said to me, her house was very much on this street. And I sat down and she said, "You're confident, aren't you?" And I said, "I have to be, Maggie. If you think I believe it's not going to work, we're in trouble." And I sat there, and it was quite remarkable. And not one door frame got wet. Not one drop of water went into anyone's houses. So yeah, it was quite special.
That was really amazing. And then you had to deal with National Trust at Kumail Farmhouse. Was that which apparently you found it's not really on their books. It didn't sound like they were promoting it for filming even.
No, they didn't know about it, Dee. National Trust, for anyone that doesn't know, is one of Europe's largest conservation organizations, and they deal with lots of exterior landscapes, but also have a huge portfolio of heritage properties. And I had contacted them because once I knew that Webley was going to be our village, it's about 4.5, 5 hours outside of London from our production base. So we needed to build a package to be on location and for me to put that case forward. And I had found out through some internet research that they had some farmhouses. And I was looking for Anne Hathaway's house. And the film office had come back to me and said, "Look, that property is ours, but we don't think it's going to work. It's tenanted. They're moving out. It's just not right." I'm sure, like a lot of us on this call know, sometimes we don't want to hear no, and we always like to go there and see what we can find and see if there might be a possibility to make it work. And I was in Herefordshire, so I thought I'd drive past anyway for this property that I'd reached out to them about. And I saw this rogue signpost. I say rogue, it was hidden. It was half in a hedge. And I took a drive down a track, about a mile down a track. And I got to the bottom of the track, and there was Kumail Farmhouse, which stood empty. And it had some scaffolding around the roof. And it was one of those moments where you think you struck gold. You're not actually sure if you can, what you're seeing is actually real in front of you. And I contacted them. They didn't know about it, but it turned out that it was one of their holiday let that they had empty for 2.5 years. They had started a renovation project but run out of money. And I said, okay, what do you think? Can we consider it? They sent a volunteer the next day and they let me in. And I couldn't believe what I could see, because mainly I couldn't believe that they were renting it out to people to stay in the condition that it was in. It had so many original features. It didn't really have a modern kitchen. I just wasn't sure. And they were charging £3,500 a week for people to go and have a nice sort of cold stay, I'd say. And from that moment on, they fully supported us in Herefordshire, that team at Kamau. And they gave me the key code and basically told me I could go back when I wanted to. And that's what happened. I drove back. I got Fiona. I drove back to London, picked up Fiona the next day, and we went down and saw it. And that's how we found the farmhouse.
That's brilliant. And just quickly, and I've got time for one brief question. Could you tell us a little bit about the woods, the beautiful woods that feature so heavily in Agnes's story?
Yes, Lydney Estate in Gloucestershire. It was the first location that I took Chloe to. We knew when I read the script, it first came to mind. It's very special. Dee, I know you and I have filmed not far from there before. I should actually say, Dee will hopefully forgive me for saying this. It's a bit of a round circle. Dee is the reason that I do this job. She gave me my first job, so there you go. Dee, yes, it's a special, it's got a very different, the earth feels very different, the iron ore, the colours, but then the moss as well. And that was really important to Chloe, the nature feeling, the sculptures of the rocks and the shapes of the trees. And we went and scouted it, and what you see is actually there. That was a cave. The birthing tree was at that location. It was a cave under the tree. It had that hollow in the tree. Our greens team obviously came in and did some work around the immediate area, but everything else was as found. And it's a very,
special place, isn't it? Well, thank you so much, Lindsay. I think I need to pass off to our next film now. But
thank you so much, Lindsay and Dee. And we will segue back to Robin. If we could chat about Marty Supreme with Matthew and Ross, and then we'll come back to the secret agent.
Hey there. We have Matt Kenya, the supervising location manager, that's worked on Succession, Honora, Best You Can, Men of Divorce. We have Ross Broder, location manager. Sorry, Honora, Best You Can, Men of Divorce. And then we have Ross Broder with Dexter Resurrection, Walking Dead, American Horror Stories. A couple of questions. Marty Supreme. When you guys first read the script, what jumped out to you guys as the biggest location challenge? Did you immediately have a location in mind for this? It is a period film, so there's it's a high-paced, sort of frantic sort of film in these areas.
I think when we started, the most challenging thing with all these is generally that there's only so many period places left. But I think it was just overall the amount of time, the amount of locations that we had, and to get them in time for shooting. Ross was up and down all those Lower East Side streets, looking for, and I'm sure you could talk about the shoe store. We had several other scouts that were combing the city for, luckily, Josh's wife had provided. Actually, I'll try to do a little share here. Provided a decent amount of research for everybody to sort of go along with, and at least we knew what we were looking for. Nothing in particular, just the volume, the amount of places that we had to find. The script was longer than the final iteration of the film was, but when we were starting, we were looking for everything.
When you were given these, and these are photos that were given to you as references?
Yeah, Josh's wife had been in. I mean, I think Josh had been working on this show in his mind for quite a while. So, she was compiling all these things of where the tournaments would have been, what the ping pong clubs look like, Lawrence's particularly. Some of these places were harder to find pictures of, but it gave everybody a leap board to go off with and to, eventually, when we started actually physically scouting with everybody, going, looking at all these places and just honing in on what looked right. Some of them took a little bit longer to find than others.
Were you trying to match any of these exactly? Because I know it's sort of a rough sort of based on true stories. How seriously were you trying to match these things to sort of the original story or the original document that it was based on?
I mean, Josh is pretty specific, and Jack, the designer, was he's legendary in his own right about like that everything had to be as close as possible. Ross, definitely chime in here about looking for that shoe store and that whole Lower East Side thing was such an important part of it and such like the beginning of the movie and like the heart of the movie of where Marty's from.
Yeah, I mean that was definitely a needle in a haystack, and as Matt said, combing the Lower East Side for spots, and then we found this great. It was actually a clothing store that had been there since the late 30s, and the family. It was like the third generation that owned it, and it had been kind of defunct and just sitting there, but all the architecture was intact, and it had these great, glass, this old glass front, and the flooring, and it just, I mean, the minute Josh walked in there, he was like, "This is it,"
Yeah,
and
it's really cool.
yeah, it was really cool. So we ended up emptying that whole thing out, and then Jack went in there and his team and built it out.
And are you guys both based out of New York?
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, when you're doing a period piece like this in this area, or in these or any area in New York, are there certain elements that are you're trying to avoid for modern city infrastructure, or things that you had difficulty, or what was the most difficult part for you guys to actually mask to get these sets going?
Yeah, there's probably, I mean, Ross, you too, down the Lower East Side, if you walk a few steps in any direction, you're going to run into steel and glass. Curbs are a little different now. The art department obviously had to bring a bunch of crap everywhere and sort of litter it about to make it look like it was that right time period, especially down there. You just try to go to the areas where the surfaces are still close to what they were. The interiors are always easier than the exteriors, but yeah.
Yeah, the Orchard Street had the bones still for us to be able to build out a certain amount of the blocks. There was Eldridge Street, there was Orchard Street, there were certain spots that we just thought, had enough structurally that we could figure out how to turn that into 1950s. And then, of course, as Matt said, where we ran into the glass, modern, exteriors, we had to, basically build our sets in front of them and get permissions from, New York hotel people who are not fun to deal with, and figure out how to not break the bank and take over the front of their place. So that was the challenge.
You guys had a few overseas locations in the movie. Are any of those overseas?
We did Paris here. Most of the tournaments were done here. Wembley ended up being Meadowlands Arena in New Jersey, which is where they used to have pro basketball, but it's been empty for a while. We did the Republic Airport, played as multiple airports throughout the world. Oh, there I am. I think we had Egypt here in Long Island, or I'm sorry, up in Westchester. Um, Even had some camels. I think the Westchester County Center, I can't remember which country that was. So they did almost everything here. Paris was all the way downtown, and the inside of the restaurant was in the Upper East Side.
Perfect. Um, the any specific other than that shop that we talked about, the Hero Shoe Store, any other locations, interiors that you guys found that worked well for their you know to represent what the period tournament or stadiums looked like. And were those all in New York as well?
Yeah, I mean, there was a Westchester County Center, Meadowlands Arena. They did outside of Rye Playland. They did one of the tournaments outdoors. Again, it was just the reference pictures, and it was also sort of the timing with the schedule. They had so many tournaments originally in the script, and they just started to sort of pare them down, and then figuring out where can they actually do these. The logistics of getting the tables out. Most of these places had things going on, so we couldn't always necessarily have a full run of them. I think in the Meadowlands Arena, we were there for several weeks in the end. Um, yeah.
For the small town, which I don't know where this was in the film, but like upstate New York or something. Where'd you guys shoot that? With the gas station and the farmhouse?
Florida. Well, the gas station was in Florida, Florida, New York, which was upstate, and then the farmhouse was down in Jersey. Um, yeah, so that's where they were.
Cool. Um, what would you want to let the audience know in terms of, one of the most difficult things that you guys had, the invisible work that your team had to accomplish to get, you guys filming on any certain set?
Well, I'll tell little Diddy, and then I guess Matt will have his. My my biggest challenge, be on the Lower East Side, which was certainly tough. We had one of the designers that wanted to leave the set dressed on a Friday and to shoot it on a Monday in the Lower East Side, which was like, good luck with that. That's not happening. But other than that, we had a farmhouse down there that was surrounded by cornfields that, Darius wanted to put these giant lifts in, and we found out late in our, situation that they were all protected by the state. And luckily, we had a good relationship with David Schoner, the film commissioner in New Jersey, and up to the last minute, we're sweating it, but finally, we were able to get lifts in the fields, and then ultimately had to buy the whole cornfield so that we could harvest it and sort of not get in trouble with the state. So that was a little tricky scenario that I was involved in.
Matthew, what about you?
Yeah, I think it's just the timing of everything, and even the stuff down in the Lower East Side too, and the stuff in the arenas, and even just the apartments. I mean, just scheduling stuff, and I think that's the biggest thing that people don't see. Probably everybody here has to deal with, and it's the least sexy of everything. Is just like you can't leave your shit here all the time, and you gotta move stuff around, and we had a lot of actors that weren't available on different dates, so it's just that puzzle piece. That's probably the biggest component.
Perfect. Well, I think that is our time. Um, Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you, Matt. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Robin. Um, and now I'm going to chat with Elston Howard, who is the supervising location manager on Sinners.
Hello,
El,
everyone.
hello. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Um, this is a really fun project. Can you tell me, because period projects always have a particular challenge to them. So what was sort of the overall aesthetic directive as far as scouting, and how far and wide did you search?
So, I mean, obviously, I'm based out of New Orleans, Louisiana. One of the unique things about the South, as far as like small towns, most of them within 45 minutes to an hour and a half, travel time from here. Small towns like Thibodaux, Bogalusa, Raceland. They're all protected, from a historical landmark standpoint. So most of these small towns, which are pretty much in like the sugarcane belt areas here, have, downtown areas that basically you can only paint them a certain color and not change the exterior facades and stuff. So you get that initial uphand on having those within close proximity of New Orleans.
Mhm.
Obviously our story centers takes place in Clarksdale, Mississippi, which, from a visual standpoint, the towns there are very similar, to here as well.
So this was shot completely in Louisiana.
Yes.
Yes. And were there any particular elements that were maybe more difficult than others to kind of match as far as Mississippi to Louisiana?
The most unique one, and I'll share some video later, was Ryan was very adamant about the terrain in Clarksdale. It's basically known the dirt roads there are like a clay reddish color, which the towns here, most of the dirt, because it's sugarcane and farmlands, is more of your natural brown color. So most of just about every exterior location, whether it was the town, the streets had to be spread with this red dirt clay. And let me see if I can share. Let's see. Second, let me just get it up. Can you see that?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, so this was downtown Napoleon. We're about 3 or 4 days out from filming. Sorry about the audio. I'm usually just discussing things with various departments and all, but you can see the dirt that we brought in, to the area just to give it that authentic look. First goes downtown to reunite with some of his friends and stuff in the two grocery stores that were directly across from each other.
Mhm. Wow, that's quite a feat. And the juke joint itself was pretty much a character unto itself in this film. And what went into finding that location?
All right, so let me I'll show the video as I'm kind of just discussing that challenge. What you're looking at is a drone shot that we did prior to Ryan coming out. I went out to this location with Hannah Beechler, the production designer, and what you're looking at actually is an abandoned golf course since Katrina. So we're looking at, over 20 something plus years that had been overgrown with ragweed. There's a lot of 200-year-old oak trees and stuff here. And, we initially scouted this just by walking through, shrubs pretty much up to like our waistline. Hannah and I felt that it had the perfect vibe that Ryan wanted. He wanted an area that had a little body of water, which is what you're looking at on the top part of the screen. And we actually went in, we looked at this about 2 days before bringing Ryan out. And the challenging thing was to at least bush hog and cut a road into this, pretty much abandoned area, and then just have she wanted about a half of a football field to just show him where she would build the actual sawmill, which was eventually turned into the juke joint. So that's what you're looking at top screen. And then you'll see as the drone moves up the road and all that we cut into this area for just to basically be able to drive Ryan into the area, which is which you see kind of to the left and right of this. And then this area here is where we actually built the set.
And did you have any specific challenges then once you actually picked the place and had to, do some further work with the environment there?
Yeah, so we quickly learned, the rumor that there's 15 to 16-foot gators everywhere in New Orleans or surrounding areas is true. That low body of water that you saw, we had to have a gator wrangler with us pretty much most of the time. Gators aren't really aggressive. They kind of stay in their own element in the water, but when you're building something so close to the to the actual water itself, You know, you have to have those, you know, but take those precautions and stuff. You know, we're always trying to, you know, do those initial things. And then, of course, when construction would start out there, they would start feeding the gators. So then they were wondering why they were coming closer and closer to the shoreline. But, you know, we managed to, you know, build our set and do everything without any issues with the gators.
And was that something that you had to look out for at night as well? Because so much of the film is shot at night, and I imagine that has an effect on the production schedule and everything else that you're dealing with. Like, were you pretty removed from neighbors, and how did the gators feel about you filming there at night?
Um, well, yeah, so most of our filming, which was pretty much the finale of the movie for the last 33 minutes, we would always have a wrangler on set. For the most part, you know, once noise comes to these elements, you know, there were obviously water moccasins, rattlesnakes, you know, they tend to just go away from the noise. We found a couple of snakes during our process of cutting out cavities and doing all the support stuff and all needed for the film. And I'll share just later stages. Of what can you see that? Did that show up or let me
No.
hit okay.
All right, something's happening.
So what you're looking at now, do you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So this was about 2.5, 3 weeks out from filming. What we had to do here to build a very solid base for these cranes is we dug about a 2.5 foot cavity in all the dirt area and put these oiled industrial roads underneath. And then, of course, cover them with, you know, dirt just so that during rain elements and all, we would at least have a solid structure underneath and, you know, not have all the equipment and trucks and vehicles that were playing in the scene sink. And just share one other thing with you. Let's see. So if you remember earlier, I just kind of discussed the issues of this red clay and that, you know, you quickly learn that it doesn't dry like normal dirt. It actually, when it gets wet, it turns into a very flexible clay and it tends to take a longer time to dry as well. I want to just show you, let's see, just make sure. All right, here we go. Sorry about that. This is what happens when it rains and you're in the process. You haven't quite put all the infrastructure out yet.
Elston is drying out.
That's Aaron just describing, you know, what we've got to do.
Troy's
And
planning in the morning to level it all out, but it's come a lot better in one day with the sun out here.
so when you know, we talk about as managers, you plan all these things, how, you know, the rain elements and all how challenging it can be.
Thank you so much. Before I pass this on, do you have any, like, were there any spots that you were really just proud of as far as like what you were contributing like to the creative process of this project?
Yeah, I think the big one was, you know, the whole storyline with them traveling from up north to the south was really trying to establish the traveling roads, the ones where you would see the vast landscape of cotton. Obviously, cotton grows further up north, and we were actually filming in the early spring of 2024. Um, we the uniqueness of using sugarcane farmlands, which cane is another plant that actually, it doesn't get harvested until the winter. So what we wind up doing was putting alfalfa plants for vast miles on these back roads, and then of course, going in and hand putting cotton and stuff. So those long travel scenes in the roads, we just knew the amount of time that it took to establish those.
Well, your work looked wonderful on film, and thank you so much for your time, Elston. It's always
Thank
great to
you.
have you with us. And with that, I'm gonna pass this along to JJ Levine, who's gonna be chatting with the team from Train Dreams.
And and quite a team we have here with us today. We have, and I hope I don't miss anyone. We have Nick Adler, the supervising location manager, Pete Morose, Jennifer Getz, Mark Dahlstrom. I think Phil Andrade, I know I saw here, and I believe also Dave Drummond is here. And
And
great. And sorry, and
Doug Dalton, yeah.
Oh, hi, Doug. Great. I'm so glad you're joining us. Um, so I'm gonna start out. Number one, this is one of the lower budgeted films that we have in this category, with a overall budget of only $10 million for a period piece. And yet we see it here joining these spectacles that we know cost way, way, way more than that. Which the film is visually very impressive, and it follows the story of a logger who was working during the time of the trains being built in train tracks being built in the Pacific Northwest. Nick, I'm going to throw the first question to you, which is similar to another question we've heard, which is when you received the script, what popped out at you as the biggest oh God, how am I going to do this challenge?
I have to say that just being again, a period piece in itself creates its own challenges. But finding and kind of sourcing out the railroad tracks and the tunnels and the train cars, I feel like that was a big challenge. That was a concern for me in the beginning, as well as we did a practical fire on the cabin in some somewhat sensitive areas in Medical Lake that previously that fall had fallen to some great fires and devastated most of the community, which allowed us to have the areas we needed to kind of show the aftermath of the fires.
Yeah, Pete and I had a chance to talk a little bit yesterday about the cabin, and the cabin is kind of a story in and of itself. And I know, do you want to talk about like who did what on your team, and then maybe we could talk about sort of the story of the cabin, and maybe Pete can take that discussion over. I don't, whatever you guys
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, we as a team, as a collective, we kind of had to use everybody's strengths. So we put our team separately in a sense that everybody kind of had their own section to kind of manage, and then I overseen everything as well. But I feel like my team would be best. They kind of know their best, what they did, to be honest, for this film. So, especially Pete and Doug Dalton and Phil, and as well as we had some representation on the west side of our state as well. And so with Dave Drummond, and so I feel like I'll let them kind of discuss what they did.
That's great. Pete, do you want to lead us off and start the discussion?
Sure. Basically, just to start with it, that I started scouting on this in the summer of 23, and it was supposed to film that fall, but then it got basically kiboshed by the strikes, and they couldn't get around the issues there, and so it went away, and lo and behold, it came back in about February of the next year of 24. So we were pleased to have that. And then we started up scouting again. I'd shown Clint, the director, and Alexandra, the production designer, and a couple of the producers that previous summer, some various areas around here, river areas and forest areas and things that they were particularly looking for. And then as we started up again, the biggest initial find we needed to go for was what they referred to as Grainier's Acre, where the cabin would be built. And we got some of our other folks that are not necessarily always scouts for locations, but they might work in the art department. And we had a bit of a team spread out trying to find different areas within our region. And then we were kind of looking at a lot of different spots, and nothing seemed to really strike home for Adolfo, the DP, and the others. And then Nick actually told me he's utilized this gal once before for a previous film for finding locations, and she manages some Airbnbs. But anyway, he asked her about if she had any ideas, and she came forth with this one spot, and he asked me to go check it out. And I went out there, and it didn't seem to initially for me really have what they wanted. It wasn't a deep forest area or necessarily what I thought may be spectacular. But then I moved a little further into the property, and then this pond revealed itself, which is what they apparently were looking for once they sent back the photos. I'll just see if I can now. I didn't do a test where, let me see here, screen sharing, but I don't think I have the, oh, here we are. Sorry. Yeah. And let's see if you're going to see this. Now, is this, are you, let's see here, are you, see, I should have done the test beforehand.
You got it, Pete. Go ahead.
Oh,
Come
is
on.
that, is
No
that there?
pressure, Pete.
Okay.
There's only like 100 people on the call.
Yeah, I know.
right
Everybody's
now.
watching. I think it went away on me, didn't it? Anyway, so anyway, this area, let's see, I think it's coming back. Do you see that?
Not
Oh.
yet.
Oh, you don't? Okay. You know what? Maybe we'll just abandon that so we don't waste time. But anyway, so it was an area that they once I sent the photos back, the term that came out from the DP was the magic. That's the magic, and it really, and sometimes you just never know. You think I was there and I thought, well, I'm here, I might as well take photos. It looks kind of interesting, but it was the spot that they wanted, and so the challenge that came out with that area was that there was no good road to the spot that they chose to build the cabin, which wasn't too far. It wasn't, I mean, not even not even maybe a quarter of a mile. I don't know, but it was enough to when you're bringing logging trucks and whatnot to practically build an actual cabin, it needed to be, much beefed up. So Nick has a bit more knowledge about that as far as what that all took. But rather than going back and forth, I'll just finish off. So then another challenge was finding the basically railroad trestle where they're going to have the work camp and the whole team building, supposedly building the trestle. There was nothing that we were aware of initially that existed around within our region, and they were planning to build a bit of a mock setup for a trestle, and we just have it close to a cliff, waterway or something, and that was the direction we were heading in. And then through someone else, someone told us about a person 2 hours north in Medellin Falls, where actually The Postman was filmed, Costner's film way back in the 90s. And so I took a ride up there, and there was a gentleman who owns private property that actually did have a railroad trestle, but it was a dead track. It's called Ponderay Valley Railroad Association used to run a tourist train on it some years ago, and they've stopped since. And that's where the trestle and the work scene and the tunnel was just a very short distance from that trestle. So that was kind of a key find and kind of amazing in sort of the 11th hour almost of before we started filming to find that. So that solved a lot. I mean, there was logistics and issues of getting there for one thing, and then getting all the equipment to that spot. But just to have that available was pretty amazing.
And you all had to work, and maybe somebody else is best versed to speak about this, but you had to work with the Forest Service or state parks, as well as some of the local tribes to work out some of the filming. Who's best to speak to that?
Well, I'll just kick off that we didn't actually
really use the U.S. Forest Service at all. There was one little bit, the snow scenes in the very sort of the beginning or whenever that is. Those were done up at a ski hill that's about an hour or so north of here, 49 degrees north. And that does sit on some, or it is on U.S. Forest Service. So we just had to do a little permit to be up there. But that was a very small crew that went up there when we still had snow in, I think it was earlier April. And they did those scenes. Was it March when we did that?
We shot that in March.
Okay. So that was a little before the main principal filming. And so that was but everything else that we did in some areas were state parks, like where some of the river scenes, and then over on the west side by Snoqualmie and out of North Bend, there's a state park called Olali State Park, and that's where the big, huge trees scenes, the scene where the fellow's climbing the tree, and there is this. I wish I could figure out how to show my photos, but there is this one thing. It's not a location thing so much, but if you remember the scene where they show there's a cut in a big tree and there's a guy laying in the middle of it, and that's actually a built tree by our art department. They did some really amazing work with building some fake trees, and they shipped them out there, and we did all of that. But yeah, those were state parks and whatnot.
Right. Mark and Jennifer, what were your main roles on the film?
I was the production supervisor, so I kind of, I oversaw Nick and Pete and the team, and Jennifer's the production coordinator, and was very involved in help. I mean, it was a lot of scouting and a lot of Adolfo and Clint and Alexander were very particular about what they wanted, and there was a lot of, we had a lot of folks out looking for that very particular thing. I do see there's a question in the chat, how do we get permission to cut down the trees? Part of that, that's the whole team played a role in that. But Doug Dalton in particular was the wrangler of a guy up in Chuila area that called, was it
Wildcat?
Jungle Cat.
Jungle Cat, right.
Jungle Cat.
Right.
And Jungle Cat knew a bunch of people that, a bunch of landowners, and we got permission to cut trees because we worked with private landowners that had planned to cut some trees and do some thinning. And so we worked with them to figure out what trees we needed to cut and how to cut them. And Jungle Cat became more jungle than cat, or more cat than jungle. I don't know which, but he was an exciting guy to work with, and Doug did a great job of wrangling him. I mean, maybe Doug, you've got a story or two, or you just can elaborate on cutting down the trees in the private property.
Yeah, sure. So, essentially we worked with private landowners, and Jason Jungle Cat, he's kind of an iconoclastic guy in Chihuahua, the whole area that we knew. He knows everybody. He comes from a family locally there, and he's a logger himself. And he's very protective of the community, but also wanting to create the opportunity within the community to maybe be, in other films. And so he could be, a little particular and a little challenging at times, but it all came from a good place, right? He really wanted to take care of his friends and neighbors, as we all do as a primarily a local crew as well. I think everybody that's here is local. And so we were very protective of our group, of our community as well, because we wanted them to have a good experience. We all work here, and we want people to come back and be available to us when we need them again. But he was instrumental. Everywhere that the major logging scenes happen is actually on a piece of property owned by Vaughan Brothers, who's a very progressive lumber or logging company. They were very helpful. They gave us permission to cut things down. Jason actually cut everything down. So there's a couple trees. The scene where the tree falls and you're seeing it from the tree's perspective, Jason cut that down and helped them set up that gag. And then there's a scene where Joel is kind of walking through the yard, and then a tree gets cut down, and then he steps out of frame, and Jason's actually in period costume and cuts the tree down. So yeah, he certainly had challenges with him at times, but at the end of the day, he delivered everything that we needed, and the film's not the same without his contributions.
Yeah, I think one of the things to keep in mind about our environment up here in the Pacific Northwest and Spokane in particular is, it's a relatively, compared to New Orleans or, other cities around the world, we're a relatively small community. We've done a lot of films, a lot of TV shows. We're very active in the community in the region, but it's not unusual to run into, a homeowner that we used as a location at the movie theater downtown or a restaurant. And, we kind of always take the attitude of, look, I don't want to I don't want to run into you someplace in public and have you go, oh, you sons of bitches, you ruined my place. I want you to go, oh, you guys are great, and that's what Pete and Doug and Nick and Phil all work for, and Doug or Dave Drummond on the west side helped us out finding, getting into the state park there and the bigger trees. So we all work in a way that, and I'm sure everybody here does, but you work in a way that if you're going to run into the location owner at some point in time, and you want to have a good relationship with them.
Yeah, I think we all feel that that's the rule of the law, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
you also, and I do want to talk about sort of the chronology of the cabin and the burning of the cat, like how you shot it chronologically. But I want to hear from Phil. Phil, what was your biggest challenge on the film?
Yeah, absolutely. I was the assistant locations manager, so I was on set most of the time. I feel like the biggest challenge for me was, since we were in country terrain, there would be something like, okay, you got to get the lighting crew in at this gate off of this mile marker in the middle of nowhere, and explain to all these people how to get there, get the gate open, get them up in a van, get all their equipment up there. So I feel like that was the biggest thing for me. That's just the main thing that comes up. The fire simulation, they had to move a lot of lighting equipment in there. Then we're shooting at night also, when our actor Joel is walking towards the fire, and the place had been devastated by a real fire before. So there's a lot of exposed root and stuff like that that we had to take care of and make sure everybody was safe when they were in there. Um, and then it was beautiful seeing the cabin go up, and then of course working with the fire department and all that when the actual fire happened too.
Yeah, Pete, I guess because you and I spoke about this before, I flip it back to you to talk about that chronology of, finding the land and building the cabin, and how you all did that process. It's a pretty incredible piece of property.
Yes, it was, and like I said, once they decided they wanted to use it and pick the actual spot that was close to the water, which in the storyline that's supposed to be a river, and it's not. It's a pond, and then they cut to some other actual river scenes. But so then once so we had I think a fair. I know, Mark, you can tell me, this pretty small construction crew, maybe 3 or 4 people that put that cabin up, and it's a full-on practical. I mean, somebody could actually probably have lived in it if they left it without burning it. But so they, in the storyline, obviously he builds a cabin, and then the fire happens, and then he rebuilds the cabin. But if you think of the process of how that would have to be, we're not going to do that in reality. So they did what they could, did whatever, all the shots they needed with the full cabin, and then some of it where he's rebuilding it is actually, when they have an overhead shot of him laying in a bed, but it's only partially built, is actually CGI to make that look, as partially built. But then they did the full on burn, and I'm really sorry I wasn't there for the day they did the burn, because a lot of people said it was pretty spectacular, and it's kind of almost heartbreaking that they did have to burn it, to me, in some ways. But that's pretty much kind of how that worked out. And it wasn't, I don't think I again wasn't involved, but I think it was just a matter of having the fire department available. It wasn't too big of a, and I think you had asked a question about building permits, and we didn't need to do anything because it was a temporary structure.
Because you're the wild, wild west.
Yeah, I think, yeah, certainly compared to maybe LA or a lot of places, there's a lot of Spokane area is a very film friendly
we're going to wrap up our discussion on Train Dreams. This is a beautiful film. I highly recommend it to you all. I'm going to go back to Sasha to speak with the team on One Battle After Another.
Thank you, JJ, and thank you to the entire Train Dreams team for
Thank
being.
you.
We have another robust team for a very location-heavy film, One Battle After Another. We have supervising location manager Michael Glazer, location manager Michael Wesley, key scout Rich Heichel, and Jacob Sina, who was the assistant location manager based out of El Paso. There is a lot to talk about this. Thank you all so much for being here today. Michael Glazer, can you tell me a little bit about your early involvement in this project and sort of what happened like early on in scouting and what y'all were looking for?
Yeah, I heard Paul told me in March of 2022 about the project. And a few months later, Florencia and I, the production designer, started mapping out places that could be possibilities. The book that it's based on takes place in Eureka, and they had already scouted like a exploratory scout of Eureka a few years before, actually before Licorice Pizza. So we kind of knew that was one of the wheel and spoke locations. And then, we would come on board full time April of 2023. But from that March to the following April, almost a year, I was dipping in and out of scouting and researching with Florencia as well. No one was really fully on, but we were always talking every other day about places we should go, things we should research while I was on other shows. And then it really kicked off in April of 2023. And then the writers and actors strikes actually kept us scouting. So we actually got months and months of more scouting done. And there was no unorganic way about it. I think I liken it to like a tree, like some branches would die off and others would sprout up. And we had some happy accidents with stuff that we found, which led to other desert locations. So yeah, and we were still scouting up until the last like 3 or 4 days of a 98-day schedule.
That makes sense because I think you were saying there was maybe about 100 plus locations total in this film. And for anyone who's seen it, the first half especially is really location heavy with a lot of like quick vignettes. And I know whenever I see something like that, I start having sympathy pains for the team involved because I know what particular beasts each of those are to lift up, even if you're only seeing it on screen for like a few seconds. So I'm really curious to hear about some of those, especially everything that you did in San Diego and Otay Mesa, because that seemed really, really involved.
Yeah, so that was the opening scene of the movie that we had already shot, prepped the whole thing up in San Juan Bautista, up in Northern California. And we were in El Paso and we were about a week in, which was also kind of a juggernaut of a location. So a week in, you're thinking the film is winding down, you can kind of get a breath. And then I get pulled aside one night saying that we need to find the opening of the movie and it's got to look like El Paso, but it can't be in El Paso because we've run out of days that we could shoot outside the state. So we define they like the actual migrant camps that you could find at a certain point, which Jacob Sina, who's on the call, can probably talk more about that. But there was migrant camps in numerous underpasses throughout El Paso, and they wanted to replicate that in California with the border wall, with an underpass, where we can light fireworks, where we can build a migrant camp. So all those things kind of made the eyes roll back in my head. And I think I had another week, 2 weeks there, and I'd left about a week before to rush out to California to try to find the location. So that came together rather quickly. We had 2 weeks to convince DHS, Border Patrol, which is in DHS, the county of San Diego. It bordered 6 jurisdictions, that set. So you could walk 10 feet and be in a completely different jurisdiction. You could be in the city of San Diego. You could be in the county of San Diego. You could be on a Caltrans bridge, or you could be on a Caltrans property that's run by the CHP, or you could be on private property. Um, so all of those things had to come together, and the pessimist in me was like, there's no way all these entities are going to say yes. But the lucky thing we had was we had already shot on the border in Mexicali when she comes over the border, and we were such good stewards of that scene, which was fairly simple. We're basically just following one person walk across the border, that they were open to the idea of us, lighting fireworks off near the border with actual migrants coming through some of the drainage along the wall. So that all came together very quickly with another location assistant, Golden Swinson, who was, he's more or less from San Diego. So he jumped back on the film to handle that location. But that was probably, I didn't talk to Paul during that time because neither of us, he didn't want to know how it all came to shape, and I also was just wanted to get the film over with and not spike the football too soon.
Of course. Michael Wesley, I'm curious to know about some of your involvement in this project as well, because there was a lot of desert work that you talked about a bit with like Borrego Springs, if you want to tell me a bit about your experiences with that.
Yeah, I will. I'll say Michael Glazer brought me on and the team in about November of 24, a couple months before we started filming, and we did a whirlwind tour of Eureka, of the Humboldt County area, and Sacramento, and the desert, and so Borrego Springs, and ultimately El Paso, so he could start giving all this information and knowledge that he had in his head to the rest of us, so we could start prepping it. We went to Borrego Springs and saw saw the areas that the Texas Dip were, the finale scene of the car crash happens, and also the River of Hills, which was what, 40, 50 miles away from the Texas Dip area. And we also had another area close to Borrego Springs, to the town of Borrego Springs, where we did Lockjaw's, SUV crashing into the desert. And Mike had kind of laid out his plan, and we needed to start getting people on board. So Department of Transportation, so CHP, and at one point for Lockjaw's crash, really to be able to close that road, the detour was going to be what, something like 65 miles for any traffic going into the town of Borrego Springs. And I remember thinking in my head, I'm like, you're nuts. They're never going to sign off on this kind of detour. But they did. And the River of Hills was, I was looking back at some of our notes and schematics, was a 12-mile stretch of road. And we went out there multiple times, identified different turnoffs and level areas where we could put our base camp, our crew parking out of the way, where we could have multiple staging areas in that 12-mile zone to be able to bring trucks, to bring process trailers and camera cars to different points to be able to do different parts. And we would do intermittent traffic control. We had a traffic control company, but the only way we could stay up with the production team to be able to lay out a closure was to have three teams to be ahead of each other. Two teams to lay down a closure, and then right before we would finish that, we'd get a third team to start laying down the third point, we pick up a closer and then move that truck and close a new section of road so we could keep filming.
Gosh, that is so involved. Um, for Rich, I'm really curious to know, since I believe you were heavily involved in the scouting for this film from early on, what was your most difficult location to find, and what was your luckiest find?
Oh, well, I would have to say looking for gosh, Avanti's neighborhood. That was difficult for me. But as Michael previously mentioned, it was like a tree where some branches would die off and others, would grow in different areas. So, you know, luckily it was taken off my plate and Jay found it in El Paso. um, I, as far as lucky finds, I feel like all of them were lucky finds. Um, Paul seemed like uh, you know a great person to scout for because he just wanted you to find cool stuff, and you know both he and Florencia would kind of work with what they had, and it was the signs of a great director and production designer.
It's always good when there's that sort of cooperation. Um, Jacob, who is with us from El Paso, I'm really curious to know about the work that you did there because we've got quite a lot of, I think the Sensei's like compound was there. There's a bunch of riot scenes with, 200 plus people. And in some preliminary conversations I had with the rest of the team, my understanding is that El Paso kind of turned into a mini backlot.
So, yeah, working in El Paso was a total chaos nightmare. The worst location manager could ever do because we had so many things to. Literally was one battle after another trying to find out and get the location situated, right? But luckily, Michael Glazer and Michael Wesley they assembled a team of other location managers to help us, with locations as well. So we had the manpower to get this done, and it was just a collaborative effort. And I spent a lot of time with Rich Heichel, when we were out scouting, like when we were out trying to find the dojo. That was one location that was scrapped off in LA, and so it was literally run down and we had to build it. That was a total nightmare because it had so many things breaking, it was leaking, and the owner was it was fun, don't get me wrong, but it was an organized chaos. And then it's 110 degrees every day in El Paso, and uh, El Paso wasn't ready for such a big size of movie, and so that was very difficult for us to achieve the safety part of it, also being so close to the border, so we had a lot. I mean, I don't know. Rich Heichel will tell you of all of our challenges because there's just so much, it was a lot of work, but I will tell you this. I was very, very flattered to be working with the best location managers in the planet, and I learned a lot from them. You know what I mean? So I had my radars on. I was trying to learn. I learned a lot. It was a learning process for me. But El Paso, I'm sure everybody loved El Paso, and but some of the buildings where we were doing rooftop scenes, they were in disarray. So we had the safety team, we had to make sure it was safe, So it was just a bunch of so many layers. I mean, I don't even know where to begin. I think we'll take up the whole block if I explain it to you, but it was just a nightmare. And then we had to block off roads and sections, and like Michael Glazer had said, that we had to split, divide, and conquer. So every location manager, no, location manager was assigned a certain area because Paul needed to have that openness of being able to film one block to another he could do it right away. So we had to be prepared and have a very close, tight relationship with the police department in order to do that. Because that becomes a nightmare when we're prepping to film this way, and then the director says, "Oh, let's go this way." It happens. But we were able to pull it off. But again, having the great location team, that it couldn't have been done without the great location team. So that's basically the brunt of it. So
It sounds like you had a team of superstars.
yes.
Michael Glazer, I think you have some photos. There's also a recent article on this film in Compass magazine that has a lot of other photos, but I was wondering if you could share some of those photos that you have with us, and perhaps you and Rich could talk a little bit about them before we close up our event. Oh, let me unmute you.
So I've got maybe 10 or 12,000 photos through the scouting. This is kind of just a combined photo album from all of our team. Some of these date back to 2022. We started filming in either end of January or beginning of February in 2023. Um, but a lot of these locations were kind of organically shot. There was a ton of stuff that we scouted, a ton of scenes that we put at multiple locations, but ended up shooting only at one. Um, but we did a lot of redwood scouting. That was probably the place that I want to say we scouted most. This was a gym that we were supposed to shoot and we were excited to shoot, and it was kind of the crown jewel of why we were going up to Eureka, and they tore it down, or they started tearing it down a few weeks before we showed up, which is a sad, sad story. And we scouted New Mexico as well for, I think, as far as my scouting, the hardest thing that we tried to find was the mission. So we searched almost 6 states. This is us on the top of El Paso. Anyone that's ever filmed rooftops, it's a giant headache that keeps most location managers up at night because these roofs are very sensitive, and if you poke a hole, you're liable for a lot more damage. And then some roofs that already have holes in it, you can be blamed for those pre-existing holes. So it's always fun filming on roofs. I think Jacob probably has been on maybe in the 90 percentile of all the roofs on top of El Paso. So if you guys are in El Paso and need some roofs, give him a ring. Um, there's just there's lots of locations throughout California that, this was supposed to be. We also couldn't figure out where we were doing the migrant roundup. We had about 5 locations. We filmed a scene in Galt. We were supposed to film this in San Juan Bautista. And there was a few other scenes that ended up going down to Otay Mesa. Um, and then lots of pictures of my dog. Um, Yeah, I don't know what anybody have any requests. I can surely. Paul's very good also with the locals.
Oh,
Um,
fantastic.
so he's very good at also explaining if you need him to come into a business and say, look, this guy's just not convinced. I need you to sit down with the bank, or I need you to sit down with the mayor. I need you to sit down with this corporation and talk to them. He's really good about doing that, kind of explaining the vision, but also curtailing it to the audience. Um, so yeah, um, we have tons of photos, tons of behind the scenes. This is Jacob. He was our
So,
stand for a lot of our location movies of trying to figure out new buildings and new places we could go into. This is a beautiful building in El Paso that we didn't shoot, but I would often follow him around with a camera. He was a great stand-in um, to try to figure out. We almost shot the bank scene here. So this was almost one of the bank robbery scenes that we were trying to find.
Mhm.
But that's about it.
Do you have
Um,
any photos of the Texas dip, and were there like some challenges to filming there?
I do. So the Texas dip, I think it's maybe too much love. I think the River of Hills on the California border is probably what everybody thinks of as the River of Hills. Um, but so this is the Texas dip. This is us scouting back in 2023. we knew we loved it, but we didn't really know if this was for sure going to be the end of the movie. Um, but we spent a lot of time here trying to figure it out. But it's where Flo is sitting down there. You really can't see or hear people coming up the road, which made it super scary. Here's the sign that we took down for her to hide behind.
Fantastic. I mean, really, really fantastic work from you guys, and we're at our time for the event. But Michael Glazer, Michael Wesley, Rich, Jacob, thank you so much. It was great to hear from you, and it was great to hear from all of our panelists. Good luck to everybody. I think everyone's going to be watching the Oscars. We're taking bets for which movie's going to win. Um, Thank you so much for being on this call. If I could have my moderators stick behind with me for a little bit, that'll be great. Otherwise, everyone have a beautiful rest of your Saturday.